Can I have my vote recorded against? Thank you.
You certainly may. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is an update in regards to the rail network build, and so acknowledge in the room we have Joe Reeves and John Knight from Kiwi Rail, Stacey from Auckland Transport. We have Dave Gordon, who's in Wellington for a select committee, so looking quite bright and chirpy, may not have been there yet, not sure. And also acknowledge in the room Pat from CRL. So I think Barry's going to lead us off.
Thank you, Chair. So this focus of this is on the rebuild program and the mitigations and things that are being put in place. It does focus on some of the events that will be happening, particularly over the next 3 months or so. Hence, we have Q Rail and AT at the table who have been working very closely as part of the members of the One Client Alliance who have been doing some very good work on this to bring this about. So really over to Joe. Are you leading us up? Yeah. John's going to lead.
Unfortunately, it's with me, Mr Mayor, Mr Chair, councillors, kia ora tātou, talofa, malolelei. It's a pleasure this morning to brief the council. Online, I've got the Chief Program Planning Officer for Kiwi Rail, Dave Gordon. On my far right, I have Stacey van der Putten, who's the Director of the Transport Active Modes for AT, and Joe Reeves, who's our Communication Strategy Advisor for Kiwi Rail. So what we're going to do is do a quick glide path in the next 10 minutes of where we are with our program to day one. And this is really through a customer lens and also through the rail network rebuild infrastructure plan. So getting ready for CRL. You know, the City Rail Link, as we all know, it's a massive amount of work that we've compressed in a 13-month program. It equates to delivering 10 years of renewals in 30 months, so it's significant. And we acknowledge to the people of Auckland and our customers it does come with disruption. So our joint presentation this morning, Stacey will go on to what does that impact look like around the timetable, and also what does it look like around the customer response. So getting ready for CRL means that there's a big push now in the next 13 months to unlock the capability that the City Rail Link will bring us. We have the funding, we have the access. We're replacing old foundations and reviewing old assets, and we're preparing the network to run in a very effective City Rail Link that will optimise the performance of our network, lifting it between 30 and 100% on various lines throughout the Auckland Metro network. This is a busy slide, my apologies, but it was sent early. So really, I'll just give a summary of what it really means. This just gives you the scale of what we're undertaking across the network. I mentioned formation, drainage, rebuilding old infrastructure. It's also including the rebuild of infrastructure to support our customer AT in the form of stations, the Jury Rail Station project, Henderson, and obviously building in the Link Alliance program and the CRL. The area that we're focusing on is to, in parallel, Kiwi Rail doing all of the work programs to support it, so that in 30 months we can support 16 trains per hour through the tunnel and optimise the lift and passenger services to all of the outlying areas of Auckland. Stacey.
Thank you, John. So one of the core things that we had to do and sort of get to an agreement on in order to be able to design the way forth was understand what that timetable looked like. And a number of things obviously come into factor, and one of the most important things is what speed restrictions you have across your network, which enables that to flow with reliability and obviously the punctuality. So where the teams have landed is, John says 16 trains per hour through the tunnel, which probably won't mean a lot to many people. So it is designed as a 15-minute all-day timetable. And so that's your level of service through the weekend, 7 days a week, is every 15 minutes. Now, what we overlay that with is a peak frequency, which brings it to, on average, every 7.5 minutes throughout those peak times of the day. So it's a substantial lift in the level of service we have today, and will provide Auckland with that frequency and freedom to be able to access the rail network, which we haven't had reliably going forth. So it is a big improvement in terms of that, which obviously has a big capacity improvement as well. So it is a slight change and a slight increase in terms of what we had in the project delivery agreement, but the modelling sort of demonstrates that that will be the desired level of frequency that can be done given what we have ahead in terms of the work that needs to be done across the rail network to mitigate those speed restrictions. We'll reduce them as much as we practically can in the time frame. So that's was one of the core things that we all needed to solve and make agreement on to get where we are today. So this slide here sort of really helps visualise what that looks like from a customer perspective in terms of timing. So you see in those orange circles there, that's how many minutes people would expect to see a train there and run through. And so, I mean, as you can see on the Western Line, that's every 8 minutes, and, you know, through the City Rail link itself, through to Waitemata Station, that's every 4 minutes. So substantial improvement. And of course, we've got Pukekohe to Papakura sort of coming online next year as well, which is really exciting for the customers out there, where they get a straight through journey on an electrified train, so don't have that change. So that's one improvement that's happening sooner rather than later, which we can all look forward to for the communities out there. So from that perspective, there's obviously, and I'll go back because I think it's better to visualise. One of the key things that we talk about is we talk about what the timing frequency improvements is and what that journey time improvements is, which are really important things. But as you can see from the design of the network, it actually enables really good connections between west and east that haven't been there before without having to change, etc. So that's a huge improvement to how people can travel about Auckland, and then through to the Southern Line and the connectivity of the wider network. Also, important thing I didn't touch on was that 15-minute frequency aligns to our bus network. So what we call our frequent network, where it is that 7 to 7 promise every 15 minutes, 7 days a week between 7 and 7 p.m. So that is a substantial change which will really help people. But in terms of journey times, because everybody likes to know what does that mean in terms of journeys, the biggest benefits are from the west in terms of that timing. So right now, if you take a train out west into the city, you're looking at over 15 minutes. So it's a substantial improvement in terms of journey time and sort of really open up that area and make it far more efficient. Also, you've got, you know, direct connections between Panmure and K Road, Pukekohe to Aotea Centre, and so it'll really change the way that Aucklanders do travel. I'm going to hand over to John now to talk about the network readiness aspect.
Thanks, Stacey. You know, working with our partner and delivering customer promise has been front of mind in this process. So this schematic here shows you what the rail network rebuild projects that Kiwi Rail will be undertaking from the south of the network, where you see in the pink. I'm a little bit colourblind, so I think that's a pinky colour. If you think from Pukekohe through to Drury, there are a number of works happening. There's the electrification program of work, which will be handed back in January next year. And then we've got the Drury station rebuild, and you follow the line up into the Manukau section. There's a series of work from Drury right through that section all the way to Westfield, where we're doing formation rebuild and upgrades to deliver that as part of the rail network rebuild. And that is the focus for our Christmas block of line this year. And the rest of the works indicate we're linking into the Key Park area, where we have the Britomart and Link Alliance and CRL projects being undertaken by the respective programs and program leads. And out west, we're continuing with our works to do formation upgrade. Next slide, please, Joe. So in terms of the rebuild itself, what we've done is we've significantly worked with our partners around how do we reduce the disruption to the customer. And we've kept some of the network open during Christmas for critical NZ Inc. supply chain for freight to keep New Zealand moving. However, there is a complete trains-free period coming this Christmas, which I'll expand upon in the next schematic. It's intensive work. We're operating 24/7. We're optimising this block of line for disruption to ensure that we deliver the customer promise. And we've worked in partnership with AT to ensure that when we do run commuter trains, we run them on time as we have promised at the end of the block of line. Next slide. So a summary of the key closures of where we're looking for calendar year 2025. You can see from here we've got this Christmas block, which is a full 4-week closure. Wheels free, that means there are no trains running. I mentioned before there are some port shunts that are being run over that period. They have been programmed and worked through. They are necessary to keep New Zealand moving from an economic perspective, from an NZ Inc. optic. Then we have Easter, a 16-day period. We then have May, June, October, we have long weekends, and then we're into Christmas 25-26 closure. It's important to note that throughout this we have kept special events open as best as we can by working with AT and our customers around keeping our public able to move on trains where possible to those special events. Next slide, please, Joe.
Sorry, I skipped.
Thanks, Joe. This is a schematic. I'm sorry it looks busy. It was a colouring in competition once, but I've simplified the colours so that I can present a little bit more easily. So this here shows you what the line closures look like for calendar year 25. You'll see the grey indicates a full network closure and the blue indicates a partial network closure. A full network closure means there are no trains running. A partial network closure means we've worked with our partner AT and we have some lines open where trains will run, and communications have been developed that will advise the customer of where those trains are running and where those trains are not running. Bus replacements have been put in place as contingency, and we've worked through that. So if you look very quickly to the January 25 block, that is a 4-week shut, and then the last blue period from the 28th through to the 31st indicates we will hand back and have trains starting to run and be fully handed back to AT by the 1st of February. The grey indicates in April a 16-day block of line, which is again, it's wheels free. We're shutting the network. We're road bridging freight as we are doing for this Christmas, so that freight can still move. And then dispense through the rest of the year, we have partial line closures around the school holiday periods where trains will still run, but parts of the network will be under construction, and again we'll communicate well in advance when those periods will occur. And the last big push is a 6-week closure in December 25 into January 26 to complete our work to hand back in early 26. And that is indicated, the blue indicates that the first 2 weeks of that block there will be trains running on some lines. So it won't be a full closure, but then we'll move into a full closure of the network as we are doing for this Christmas, and to complete our work to be on time to meet customer promise for CRL. The last slide here really talks about the impact on metro and freight mitigation. Stacey's covered really the timetable, and she'll talk about the customer response next. But really, the impact is significant for both customer, commuter passengers, and also for freight. And we've got a robust comms plan that underpins that and has been in message to customer. Please note that Northern Explorer and Tahuia are delaying their programs and train running to facilitate the delivery of works, and their operational tempo has been adjusted. Thank you. Stacey.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So managing the potential traffic impacts. So what you heard was wheels free. Now, wheels free does provide huge challenges to moving people as well as freight. So there's been a tremendous amount of work that the team have done working with Auckland Transport Operating Control in terms of what does that look like in terms of the flow onto the motorways to get freight out of Auckland and where it needs to be. It's a huge exercise, and they modelled very different scenarios based on light phasing, length of vehicles, etc., to land on the desired option that they're moving forth with. not without its challenges, because we're looking at 40 big trucks per hour during the peak of that sort of flow through. But the design has been to mitigate what we call the worst of the levels of services from a motorway flow management perspective. And so that means that trucks will come in via State Highway 1 and they will exit via State Highway 20, and they're sort of consulting in terms of emergency services provider to make sure that everybody's aligned and understands why we're doing this, and also the impacts to the network. So the team will be watching it throughout that period and make adjustments as necessary based on what they're seeing in terms of the condition of the network and where there are pinch points and what that may divulge. But there has been a lot of data crunching behind the scenes to see what that would be in order to be able to front foot it and make sure that the best option is picked for day one when that sets off. What you see here is actually, I got some work done to speak to the retail market specifically about what that meant. Comes the holiday season, people are obviously concerned about getting to shopping centres, particularly when we look at next Christmas, and what are those pinch points on the network. Obviously with the city centre, Newmarket and Sylvia Park are obviously the three key ones modelled. There's some really interesting sort of insights when I sort of looked at now versus 2019 in terms of mode use. But that's another topic, but the whole idea is making sure that they can accommodate those levels based on alternate services. And that's actually really sort of helping the thinking in terms of how people are moving about Auckland during those times. So this is 24 February data, you see, which will be the absolute worst it could potentially be in January. Obviously is a lot lighter, but knowing the worst case scenario obviously helps the team to plan to make sure there's sufficient capacity across the network to be able to accommodate it. From an operational response perspective, we obviously have a full bus service replacement. Not everybody likes taking buses, we know this, and so we do see a drop-off. So obviously with the modelling that data, we know what percentage of customers will elect to use an alternate mean or be on holiday or not travel based on the last few years sort of history of those closures. And we've also got what we call express services that will be introduced in January as well for the duration until trains come back online at the end of the month. And so that will help alleviate some of that bulk across the network and get people to where they need to be more quickly. And that goes to obviously making sure that we have trains operating, everything's sort of back to normal when that full school year commences. We know that some schools do go back a week early, so we're making sure that systems and services are in place to be able to accommodate that too. We'll be looking at bus lanes where practical, so there are a couple that have been put in place in previous rail renewal projects that will be sort of used throughout that time without diminishing the level of service to other traffic across the network. And when we do have partial blocks aligned, we'll be making sure that we use 6 car sets, and we'll be doing peak direction train services will obviously be prioritised to get people in or out based on the time of the day. A big aspect is, of course, the journey information. So I can say that everything in preparation for this Christmas closure and thereafter until the start of when trains commence again has already been loaded into the system and is ready to go. So there's full visibility for every customer to understand what alternate services they can use, and the timing and tracking of all the rail replacement buses across the network. Also improving some of that wayfinding with stations to make sure people know really clearly where those bus replacements are going from. Major events. Now, this is going to be really challenging for us, and the teams have done their best in order to be able to understand when some of those key events are coming. We are not going to be able to avoid all of them. And that is where we're going to have to come up with alternate scenarios. So you'll see straight off the bat in January, we do have 2 large crowd concerts. They were already positioned in an existing block of lines, not the extended one. So that challenge was known. So what we'll be doing for that is looking at other measures that we've done when we've had the same scenario. So in terms of pop-up park and rides and having shuttles and sort of maximising the flow, we'll also be using the fan trail that we used at the recent Coldplay concerts, which worked really well. And it's a time of the year where the the network itself is a lot lighter than busier times of the year, so that'll help. So you can see we've got a number of sporting events that we know will hit at a particular time, so making sure that there's trains running for those, and also those key events that we know are in the calendar already, such as when Santa visits, making sure we have trains available for the Santa parade and things like that as well. So it is a big task, but there's a lot of people sort of working on those mitigations to make sure there's plenty of bus replacements available to be able to support those key events. Hand over to Joe.
Kia ora koutou. Great to be here. So Stacey has talked through some of the journey-specific communications, and I'll be focusing on the wider public communications activities and plans. Just to set it in context, although I'm with Kiwi Rail, I'm actually here on behalf of the communications reps from all three partner organisations, so AT and City Rail Link Limited as well. We are working together to plan and deliver communications and work closely with our delivery teams too. So we are all in this together. We know that. We know that's the way it needs to be, the good and the bad, and all accountable. And we understand that it's hugely important to bring Aucklanders along with us on this journey. So when we last spoke to some of you a few weeks ago, it was the day just before the announcement, pictured here with Minister Brown and Councillor Simpson as acting mayor. And hopefully some of you will have seen the coverage. We had a lot of media coverage. We got a lot of media there, which meant we got a good chance to get our message out around what the work programme looks like over the next sort of 14 months. And we know we still have a big job to keep going and sharing progress and info and open dialogue and the benefits around City Rail Link and the transformed services it will bring us. So following that announcement and the phased communications we did with stakeholders and partners on the day, we've been working together to deliver our plan in line with our shared strategy. Some examples of some of our approach on this slide. One of the really good things about our collaborative approach is that we have access to a large audience and lots of different channels and platforms to share our messaging and our content, including websites and social media and newsletters and marketing campaigns. So we're able to really get that message out there. Kiwi Rail is also focusing on notifications to corridor neighbours when major work's happening, and that's something that my team's working on now, is just making sure that everyone knows what's coming if they're living close to the corridor on one of those major work sites. And just in terms of progress, obviously this work programme that we're mostly discussing hasn't started yet, but in terms of the communications, we've been busy over the last few weeks rolling out info to all our stakeholders and looking for opportunities to collaborate more widely with these stakeholders and partners wherever possible. As an example, some of the business groups have expressed interest in working together with us to run events nearer to the City Rail Link opening. We've put out our Auckland Project newsletter, which goes out to thousands of people, not just corridor neighbours, but lots of other people who signed up who are interested in where we're working and what we'll be doing. And we're also briefing local boards and other business associations, retail organisations, and working closely with our freight customers to organise everything there. There's also, I believe you will have all hopefully received a social media tile this week, which you can use to share through your channels more extensively, just with some information around the closures. And we have various marketing campaigns led by Auckland Transport that have been delivered recently. And I think we have an example of one of those videos, which I thought would be good to play to you. Just a quick note, it does play in portrait because it's been optimised for mobile phones for social media channels. So hopefully you'll enjoy.
Did you know in just over a year, there's going to be trains running beneath my feet every 4 minutes? The City Rail Link tunnels head all the way up to the brand new underground railway stations, Te Waihoratu and Karanga'ahape. By now, you would have heard a lot about City Rail Link. And maybe you're like me and you're wondering, what does this mean for you? Well, I'm here to tell you how it works and how it's going to transform transport here in Tamaki Makaurau. The good news is more trains, more often, and they'll be better connected to buses, which means getting around the city should be easier. In 2026, when the CRL opens, trains will be running through Waitemata Station, Brenema, in both directions. This means I can get from here up to Karanga-Ahape Station in just 7 minutes, and to Mangawhau, previously Mount Eden Station, in just 10, which means I can nip up to Karanga-Ahape Road for lunch. The CRL will also make it faster to get around the rest of the city. You can get from Henderson to Te Waihoratu Station in just 35 minutes, and a train from Panmure to Karanga-Ahape Station in just 21 minutes. Connections to the south will be better as well. You'll be able to catch an electric train from my hometown Pukekohe to the city centre and out west. And I bet you've guessed it by now, but because of the City Rail Link, there'll be more trains running during peak hours. There's been so much happening across the network to make this happen and to improve reliability. The City Rail Link is going to be huge for Auckland, and it's coming in 2026. More trains, more often. I'd say that's something to look forward to.
Thanks. And just to close out, in terms of next steps, we'll be keeping in touch. By the end of this week, you should receive a forward look memo, which goes to elected members, which is part of our commitment to try and give you as much advance warning as possible around where you can expect things to be happening on the network, and also progress in terms of what we're achieving. We're going to be putting out media release ahead of Christmas around those closures and ongoing content and video explainers. And I believe we'll be invited back here in the next few months to update you all. Any questions?
Done. All right. Thanks, team. Dave, you got anything to add while you're sitting there resplendently dressed?
No, I'm strangled by the tie, but no, the teams have said everything that needs to be said. Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on, someone like to move? Thanks, Chris. And seconder? Thanks, Desley. Okay, so questions. First up, the Mayor.
Thanks for the presentation. Just how confident are you that you're going to get the work done on time? And will we be receiving a full report on the work done after the first closure, so we can see that, righto, that went well or badly? I know it's full of hope here, but that's the question.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, good questions, and of course. The methodology when we did the program, when the funding was released for CSA2 Ringham, which was 159 million plus the backlog from Crown, I was challenged by Dave, who's online, and how do we do it better, faster, and deliver on time? So we redid our methodology. We jointly did that with our partner AT and AOR in the room. We've had that externally vetted by WSP and Becker, and the reports have been brought back. And AT have done an independent review through third party called Quarterback. They finished a report, and it vetted our methodology, and it's robust and the findings were it's robust, it's efficient, and we have confidence that it will meet the deliverable. And to your second question with respect to updates, the intention is as we segment our way through those blocks incrementally through calendar year 25, our customers receive updates on plan versus actual target as we're tracking, so that we have confidence and assurance that we are delivering on time, or where we need to adjust our program, we reapportion resources, or we actually reallocate or look at how we do it faster to make sure we deliver that date.
That's a good answer. I mean, the first lot's a big chunk. So at the end of that, if we get a clear response, it'll give us a good idea how well that's going. So I look forward to receiving a clear report at that stage. Is that right?
100%, Mr. Mayor. And I think that to your point, just to finish, is the idea is blitz it early, the old go hard, go early mentality. But and that's the guidance we received from Dave, Andre, and Peter with respect to what we must deliver for customer.
I think you're doing the right thing. I just want to make sure that at the end of the first block it does work. If it doesn't work at the end of the first block, we've got a problem. Okay.
100%, thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Desley.
Yeah, great minds. That's where I was coming from too. So I will just ask one more question, if I may, and I hate it to be negative, but we did tell you in the workshop to ask ASB Tennis Classic to be added to major events. You know, Parnell Station is used to get to the tennis and to get home, and you haven't added it to the report. It is an important part. because ideally people would be using that station. So could you please make sure that you add that? And just a second question, just supporting the Mayor, how often are you coming to us on this update of the works? What's the regularity of the update?
Yeah, so Councillor Simpson, so what we intend to do is we have a meeting on the 13th of December with AT, and we're determining that tempo and cadence. The intention would be to, after the first block of line, which ends in end of January next year, we would give a full plan versus actual update, and then we'd be looking at potentially monthly updates as we're tracking through the year through AT and obviously on to council.
Thank you. I think that's really important, especially if you've got a niggle that something might not be right. It's better to know ahead of the time. Great, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Thanks, Chair. These are quite operational, so I know you'll love that, Chair. Kia ora. Just this is a really good update. On the mitigations for how we get people around the city in the meantime, can we please have some understanding of how much we're putting into those rail replacement buses and for the events? First, on rail replacement, we said during the big $330 million upgrade a couple of years ago that there would be a look at temporary bus lanes or different. That never happened. Is there any work going on temporary bus lanes, clearways during that time? Just simply trying to get those buses through, like we're doing with the freight, really pumping how we move them around. And the other thing is, are we working with the bus companies, so booking out coach lines and different things now, early, to make sure we have just like, because when a bus turns up and it's supposed to replace a train of 3 carriages, it's just not the same. And so that's where people drop off the system, I think.
Absolutely, good questions. I mean, the closures have been designed around what I'll call the less stress points in the network in terms of what we see with regular loadings across the network as a whole. So it's been designed deliberately to when people are travelling the least to support some of that impact. In terms of the rail replacement buses, I can get you what I call a full allocation. I can send that to you in terms of what that looks like, as well as the express services. We designed it particularly for the Christmas block. The team have ramped up the second after the Christmas shut, the official Christmas shut from a business perspective through to the end of January. So it's amplified up and it gets more and more throughout that sort of tenure, particularly the last 2 weeks when we know that people do come back to work after holidays to make sure that there is sufficient service. Over the previous rail network renewal programs, what was done was that a number of support fleet was kitted out with the appropriate equipment to be able to act as rail replacement. So hop equipment for making sure that that was enabled was a key focus, and also to make sure that they were accessible. So yes, they have secured enough buses to cover this, and that's probably the most important thing. We have school buses during the holidays. We wouldn't be able to do that without it. So designing it for when school's not in school, those holidays has been super important. Otherwise, we just wouldn't have the fleet availability. So using all that fleet has been booked.
And on drivers, are we ensuring that there's a little bit more elasticity, I guess, than normal? Because I can imagine that normally during holidays and different things, bus drivers are taking holidays. You're going to have lots of leave. We don't want to get to a situation like 2 years ago with that big drop off. Are they looking at how they're going to cushion for this year? Because there's going to be a lot.
Absolutely. So we've made sure that there's adequate driver numbers across the network to be able to support it as well. In terms of that, so the holiday timetables come in towards Christmas. Okay, so that is basically going towards a more of an amplified Sunday timetable. So you've got increased early services to accommodate hospitals and workers and things like that. But the base timetable is less. Yeah, so you need less drivers to do that. Obviously, with the rail replacement, you need more. It sort of balances out. But yes, it is a busy time for bus operators to be able to manage, but there's ample bus drivers across the network to be able to do it at this point. A couple of years ago, we wouldn't have been so lucky.
And last question, Chair, just on, and I see that really good memo on Luke Combs and the Eden Park, the major events, but are we... The Kiwi Rail, are we are we looking to get KiwiRail to help fund that? Like, I know they're helping to fund rail replacement, but those are going to be significant events and significant costs. Would KiwiRail help? Because that is going to be significant disruption to the city, and we will need far more event buses than normal. And the last point on that is, are we sort of modelling and testing different types of traffic management? Because we know that during Coldplay that was seamless, both bus and train, amazing. But sometimes the ways the buses cut through the public or cut through the buses coming in can actually delay things significantly, and you have a long line of empty buses sitting there waiting. And I'm sure that's being done, but sometimes just slight tweaks can help the whole thing.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, they've absolutely modelling all that in terms of what that flow through looks like from a special events perspective, and actually what priority needs to happen around that. So you did talk about pop-up bus priority to service. That's not always practical, and given that, you know, stations might be on a residential road, yeah, so how you do that is impractical. But in terms of those areas where you do have high flow through, such as Great South Road, where we actually did a pop-up bus previously, is now more of a permanent, I think it's a T3. And so yes, where practical, they are being looked at. Where there's road space without what I call strangling the rest of the network, it is absolutely happening. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Richard. Julie.
Thank you. Just talking the question there about temporary bus lanes and stuff, love to see some of that. On the comms, and it's really good to have you here to speak to that, Joe. One of the things that's been raised with me in the past, particularly for the Western Line, that's the one I'm most familiar with, is the impact that it has on schools when there are closures or indeed, you know, signal faults and stuff like that. Now, acknowledging that a lot of this work is going to happen during the school holidays, there are also still, for example, holiday programs that operate out of schools. There are staff who will be wanting to access those schools as well. So I was hoping to see them on the list, and also some of the large employers that might be on the rail line as well. So is that something we could look at getting added in?
Thank you, Councillor. Schools have been they've had a good communication package as well. So the team have been around to see them and obviously understand start and stop times and requirements through that period. So there has been consultation with the schools.
Okay. Does that include primary and intermediate as well as secondary?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
great. And large employers, so I guess I'm thinking particularly of some of those Southern Line stations. There'll potentially be some quite large employers near their factories and the like that might have a lot of people using the rail line. Have they been, can we reach out to them? I imagine the local boards in those areas would have some really good intel of who would be worth talking to.
Yeah, so some of that will have been dealt with along with some of the freight messaging. We have had meetings with some of the business, like the retail NZ and hospitality NZ that tend to have wider members, but there is probably more that we can do there, so that's definitely something that we'll be looking at rolling out between now and when the line closes.
Great. Cool. And just one other question around the rail replacement buses. We have had issues in the past with the quality of some of those buses. And in particular that they're not necessarily able to deal with the accessibility needs. And the other thing I've seen a bit of is them not having the infrastructure for tagging on and tagging off, and therefore, you know, we don't capture those rides at all. Is that going to be, is that something that's being cleaned up for this round?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Absolutely. So, I mean, there may be the occasional one that happens in terms of that. The challenge, I think, for the team has been in prior years, is we take the Eastern Line as a good example of that. So if it shuts down during the regular school year, you don't have the availability of the school fleet to be able to use, which is fully equipped and accessible. And so there is guidelines, what we call the requirements for urban buses. There are some that have exemptions from that. To sort of manage the program, but by all accounts, the majority will be accessibility enabled buses.
Cool. And hop open loop and
payments. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Oh, thank you. And I guess it's a bit of a measure of frustration for me, not directed at AT or KiwiRail, but having been one of those that really wanted to see the CRL get off the ground, and then followed it very closely, looking at other international examples. It's been apparent to me for some time that getting it operationalised is always going to be a big job. You know, we know that from the Sydney Metro line, we know that from the Elizabeth line, and I suppose the person I'd like to have sitting before us at the moment would be Sean Sweeney, if I had my way, because he was quite dismissive of perhaps some of the questions that I had been trying to ask about that. So forgive me if I'm directing them to you when I'd really like to be directing them to him, but he's off an island. I want to better understand, in terms of mitigations, because you know how hard it is to get any major infrastructure program off the ground. You heard Councillor Darby and myself talking about the importance of public transport, and unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, this will potentially, the perception might be, well, it's been, you know, disruptive, more disruptive than it need necessarily be, and I don't think that's the case, but we're dealing with a world of perceptions. So what I want to be assured is, in terms of mitigations, could we have seen more money thrown at it to speed it up? You know, you've got the funding of the 159 million being the balance of the rail network growth impact management program, etc., etc. But were there any other strategies that could have been deployed to minimise the amount of time and disruption? Can you speak to that?
I'm happy to take that question, John, if you like, Councillor. I believe the answer to that is no. There's only so much work you can crowd into any given work site without that actually becoming inefficient. We've structured this program, as Stacey talked about, around the school holidays, and the strategy to minimise disruption. This is as hard and fast as we can go. If I had double the money, I couldn't make it go any faster. We've absolutely crammed in what we can. So I genuinely believe this is the most efficient way we can do it, and no amount of additional money would make that any different.
That is my understanding, but I just wanted it stated for the public record that this
I'm happy to state it.
This is a sort of necessary evil. I guess the other concern that I've got is what, in a public perception perspective, the impacts on patronage and also the revenue loss for us over this period. Have you scoped what that might be, Tracy, in terms of what the impact for AT might be?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we have, and actually we do have are seeking an SOI adjustment in terms of what that patronage is based on days of closure, which I think we'll be talking about a bit later. So yes, there is an impact, because we do know that a percentage of customers will find other ways, and so it does have an impact. I do want to say too, in support of the actual program, we did look at alternate options. Now, the alternate option was having significant delays and speed restrictions across the network, which wouldn't have enabled the timetable. And we could have, what we call, drawn out the stretches and blocks of lines across the network in order to have the works done over years once it's open, which from a desirability perspective and a patient's perspective, and we talk about disruption fatigue, we just thought that would not be the desired outcome for anyone, to have closures once the lines are up and running as the City Rail Link is integrated.
The main focus, of course, in our discussion today thus far has been around passenger rail, but of course there are massive disruptions in terms of freight, and I just wonder if there's anything else that you can add to your comms and work that's being done to give assurance that we're going to be managing that as best we can, and also minimising the numbers of additional trucks coming onto the roads.
Yeah, so there is part of the conversations that we're having when we're briefing stakeholders now, wherever relevant, we're talking a lot about those road movements and how those are being managed, and working really closely. The delivery team has set up a group where they're discussing exactly how the road movements are going to be managed, and we are sharing some of that modelling with the people that need to know that are based in those areas to make sure they understand how it's being addressed.
Chair, when the time comes, I don't need to speak to this, but I do want to acknowledge, while Tracy's here, and also Barry Potter, the work that they have been doing behind the scenes on this for months and months, because this was always going to hit us. So thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. So thank you, team. And I just want to echo what Chris has said there. I guess the amount of work that you have done together to get the best outcome we possibly can has been really, really top class. So I just want to thank you for that. Having owned a restaurant, I'm yet to find a way of making an omelette without cracking an egg. So we got to do it, and we're doing it in the best way we possibly can. So thank you. So we now open it up for debate. And Desley?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something along those lines. Thanks, Chair. So, councillors, I spoke at the announcement of the of the rail network rebuild 2025 a few weeks ago, because the Mayor was offshore. And I talked about how CRL will fundamentally transform public transport in Auckland. But of course it can't do that without also transforming the existing rail network so it's capable of running the extra trains, and doing so without endless weekend and late night disruptions. Commuters have suffered that disruption for 5 years or more, and I think an important part of that communication is explaining why, when the network has been down for such a long time, it's still going to be down. But I think it's also worth remembering that our network was originally designed for freight, not for being a popular metro commuter network that it has now become, and going to become even better. So the network, we know, has serious issues, and we need to rebuild that ageing foundation and modernise outdated assets that are slowing trains down. I want to congratulate both Kiwi Rail and Auckland Transport for working together on a plan to get this critical work done in ways that reduce disruption as much as possible. And yes, they did look at all sorts of alternative options, and this one, and I'll repeat it, is a program that reduces disruptions as much as possible. And they'll be focusing on times when the train use is at its lowest, like January, during major holidays, weekends and late evenings. And where possible, crews will work around the clock 24/7. And this strategy means, of course, that in most cases when schools and workplaces resume regular schedules, weekday trains should run with minimal interruptions. The network will be fully operational for more weekends next year than they've been operating this year. So this ambitious program delivers a decade's worth of maintenance in just 18 months. As a city, we're putting a lot of trust in Kiwi Rail to stick to these timetables, and we all want to avoid unexpected closures. It's now critical that Aucklanders are kept informed about the scheduling and alternative options when the trains aren't running. So that's our challenge, isn't it, to Kiwi Rail and to Auckland Transport. Stick to the schedule, keep customers informed, keep us informed, and if things go wrong, get onto it early. We need to know, the public needs to know, and more importantly, deliver on time and on budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
No, I used the opportunity to make my thanks before. Thank you.
No problem. Mike?
Yes, thank you. I recall that when I saw the video about how great the CRL is going to be, I recall the very first Transport Committee meeting of the new Auckland Council in December 2010, in which one of the Conservative councillors tried to overturn the Council's recommendation to support a City Rail link, and we went to battle stations and managed to defeat that amendment. But if only people in the room knew how long and how much the CRL was going to cost, perhaps we may not have been so successful in hitting that amendment off. And I also recall 2 years ago when Mr. Gordon presented about the rail rebuild and the fact that despite the about 600 million paid to Kiwi Rail by Auckland ratepayers for access to the rail network, significant amount of work still had to be done. Where that money went, to me, is not clear, but a former Minister of Transport provided a significant amount of funding for Kiwi Rail on top of the funding that Aucklanders have been paying Kiwi Rail for a fit-for-purpose rail network to get the job done. And yet, rather like the CRL, the job seems to be dragging on and costing more and more money, which is disappointing. Disappointing because we're hemorrhaging rail passengers, rail patronage, which took so many years to build up, 20 years to build up, and now we're still way behind where we were in 2019. I wonder, you know, we talked about congestion charging in an earlier item, and it makes me question, where is the joined up thinking? Where is the strategic thinking in terms of transport in Auckland? Because I don't see much of it. Last month, we dealt with the public transport fare review. And despite having a crippled rail network, one of the reasons for the swinging increases for loyal PT users, working Aucklanders, is PT operating costs have increased by 63 million in the last financial year through contract indexation. Presumably that's with our foreign-owned operators. Increased tracks access charges to Kiwi Rail. So Kiwi Rail, even though we have a non-fully functioning rail service, which is for the last couple of years, which is hemorrhaging passengers, they're still bumping up their charges. What sort of landlord would increase the rent for, say, a house where the roof badly leaks or some of the rooms can't be used? And then I ask you, what sort of tenant would pay that rent increase? But there we are. It's very disappointing for someone who has been involved with rail in particular over the last 20 years, 30 years actually, going back to 1992 when we bought the DMUs from Western Australia, how poor the situation is right now and how we seem to have lost competence in this country. Once a can-do country, we seem to have lost critical level of competence in the way we deal with infrastructure, build infrastructure, and the way we manage it. So they are my comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. There no more discussion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put it. Those in favour say aye. And against? Carried. Thank you.